Namaste. On behalf of the Shriram Schools, I would like to welcome Dr. Manfred Spitzer to our series of talks, Manjushri. Manjushri envisions to address and focus on the holistic growth, well-being, and happiness quotient of each student. These interactive talks provide a platform to our learners to grow in an emotionally secure and nurturing environment. Without further ado, I would like to invite Avika to introduce our speaker for the day.
It is an honor and a privilege to have Dr. Manfred Spitzer, one of the world's leading psychiatrists, a neuroscientist, and author, interact with the students at the Shriram School. Dr. Spitzer has made groundbreaking discoveries correlating the impact of technology on the human mind and physiology. His research focuses on the interface between cognitive neuroscience and psychopathology. Since 1998, Dr. Spitzer has been the medical director of the Psychiatric University Hospital in Ulm, Germany, and in 2004, he founded the Transfer Center for Neurosciences and Learning. A graduate of the University of Freiburg, he's additionally worked at Heidelberg, Harvard, and the University of Oregon. Widely published in neuroscience, learning, and psychiatry, and author of numerous texts, Professor Spitzer is a recipient of the 1992 DGPPN DUFA Research Award for Psychiatry, Psychotherapy, and Neurology, 2002 Cogito Prize of the Cogito Foundation, and the 2010 Science Prize of the Margaret Edna Foundation. I would now like to invite Dr. Spitzer to share his thoughts with us.
Thank you for the great introduction and for introducing me to the audience. I must say I'm a psychiatrist by training, and I do work in the clinic, and I see patients every day. At the same time, I have done quite a bit of work in computer modeling of neural networks. And lately, because I have kids, I got interested in, well, schools, what happens in schools, what happens during learning, which is why I founded the center in 2004 for the study of neuroscience and learning. And let me also state up front that I'm not against digital media. Not at all, because being a scientist and being a medical doctor implies to work with digital media all the time. But what allows me to be productive at my work and to get many jobs done over the day is not necessarily the best way for, let's say, babies, kids in kindergarten or school, or even young adults when it comes to learning new stuff. At the same time, there are known, and this is not my opinion, it's all out in the medical literature, you can find it all on the web, there are known physical, mental, and even for society, risks and side effects of digital media use and overuse, and I try to give a summary talk of these risks and side effects. Again, it's not my opinion, it's all out there, it's published in high-power science and medical journals, and I think it's quite important to let you know about these risks and side effects so that everybody can act responsibly. That's my goal, and this is what I want to accomplish in this talk. Let me start with, well, my field, brain research. Here you have two brains. This one, the one on the right side looks quite normal. It's actually a normal brain. And the one on the left side doesn't look normal. In fact, you needn't be a radiologist to figure out that there's many things wrong with the brain on the left side. About 85% is gone. This brain has been published among many other brains in the medical literature for a very simple reason. The man who belongs to this brain, a 43-year-old French civil servant married with 2 kids, doesn't suffer any symptoms. He's completely normal. How can this be? Think about making a hole in your computer. It would no longer work. But here's a brain where more than half is gone and nobody notices. Not the person, not other people. The person is just fine. How can this be? And let me go into this for just briefly, but to mention a few very important points about the brain that are important to comprehend the rest of my talk. So the brain, there is neurons in the brain. Unless the computer that I use to give this talk, it has a CPU built in, the central processing unit, and it has a hard drive and the hard drive does the storage of the information, and the CPU, the central processing unit, does the processing of the information. Neurons in our brain, here's one. And by the way, you have learned that there are gray cells in our head. Now I'll show you a yellow one. What's wrong? Actually, the picture is wrong, because you can't make such a picture simply because there are 200 more neurons on the field on which you see that single neuron. And every neuron gets incoming fibers, not just to the cell, but also to the many fibers that spread out from the neuron, the dendrites. And there are up to 10,000 incoming fibers. And now think about it. If you saw here 200 more neurons, and for each single neuron, 10,000 fibers that come in, you wouldn't see anything. And I'm not telling you this so you know how to shoot neurons with your camera in the future. No, I want to make one important point. There is no such a thing as a neuron in isolation. What there is are thousands and thousands and thousands, in fact, 100 billion neurons. And these neurons, they have connections. Here's a nice rendition, a drawing of a connection. It's called synapse, and you see yellowish. This is electricity coming in, and then greenish, that must be chemistry. So an electrical signal is transmitted chemically at a synapse. And the amount of synapses in our brain, well, that's 10,000 synapses per neuron times 100 billion. That's 1 million billion synapses. That's quite a bit. So why do we have these synapses? The interesting thing is that in biology, school children learn these days how synapses work, neurotransmitters, receptors, action potentials, and all of that. What's hardly discussed is, why is this? Why do we have a synapse here? It would be easier if there was just a cable going through, simply because it would be faster and it would use less energy. And if something's faster and uses less energy, we call it more efficient. So why all this synaptic inefficiency? Well, the reason is very simple. Synapses don't just transmit information. They have one more job. They change whenever they are used. We call this all of this we call neuroplasticity. When we refer specifically to synapses, we speak of synaptic plasticity. But that's the point. That's why synapses are there. If there had to be just a connection, then a cable would be enough. But what you want to have in a brain is a connection that can be changed. And it is changed whenever it's used. So when you use a certain connection, it gets better and better. When you don't use it, it gets less and less good. In fact, it gets removed eventually. And when you use it a lot, a second one will grow. So the brain is constantly changing according to its use, which is, by the way, the most important finding from neuroscience in the last half century. There has been talk about connections in 1949, but nobody knew how this did work. And it took quite a while. This is taken from a Nature paper that came out in 1999. And in this study, they managed for the first time, first to characterize the synapse, monitoring if there was more or less traffic across the synapse, and then make a picture of that very synapse. And the left synapse, there has been less traffic going through, and in the right synapse, there has been more traffic going through. And if you look at it, it is bigger. There's an extra dendritic spine that has grown because of a lot of use. And so synapses change when they are used. And again, this is the most important finding from neuroscience of the last half century. And this also explains brains like the one I showed you at the start. This is again shown here on the right side. On the middle side, that's a 51-year-old German truck driver who happened to end up in the scanner for some reason, and they made this photograph. And it blew the doctors off their chair, simply because if you show the image in the middle here or on the right to a radiologist, he will tell you, what are you up to? These people are dead. And the most interesting case is the left one. It's about a 3-year-old girl who had an infection in this part of the brain. So they decided to take out the left brain of the girl when she was 3. And then the girl was reinvestigated by the doctors when she was 7. And this got published in the probably highest powered medical journal, The Lancet, in 2001. And the doctor said, well, here's this person with half a brain. And we thought, well, here are the language centers. So you'd think the girl doesn't speak and doesn't understand. Here is also a motor control and sensory control of the right side of the body. So you'd think the girl is in a wheelchair and seriously disabled cognitively and physically. The girl came in, she jumped into the doctor's office, and she had nothing in terms of neurological signs, and she was fluent in Turkish and Dutch without language centers. That's an important point. And it's also important that we know of this girl that she had her brain removed at the age of 3. Because if you and I had our half brains removed, we would be in wheelchairs, and if it was that side, we wouldn't speak and wouldn't understand. But young brains, to put it this way, are so wonderful learning devices, and they learn so quickly. A child needs one presentation of a new word, and got it. You and I, we need several, and if it's another language, another several. So it takes us longer. But for a child, it learns really quickly, such that the brain of a newborn who doesn't know much gets a lot of knowledge inside of it to deal with the outside world, to learn about the outside world and deal ever better with the outside world in interacting with it. And you need this interaction, you need to manipulate things, you need to, well, grasp things, you need to answer questions that you have. It has been shown 11-month-olds respond to weird experiences by trying out things, that is, doing experiments, whether this can really be the case. So they interact with the world in order to understand it. And again, this type of learning happens early on, and it happens real fast. So the brain kind of bootstraps, gets ever more information, and this has to happen early on, and it does happen early on, except when, well, if you don't talk to a kid, it won't learn language. If you don't let it stand on its feet, then it won't learn how to walk. So you have to get this done actively. This is a slide taken from an economist who wondered what the return of investment in education is, depending upon the age of the human beings that you're going to be investing in. And you see this red curve. If you want to spend $1 or the euro or any other currency, you better spend it, or you best spend it in preschool, kindergarten, and school is okay, but after school, the effect in terms of more education that you gets less and less. And most of us are on the right bottom side here, and that sounds very depressing. But let me add one thing before you get depressed and won't follow me along. This is only half of the truth. The other half is on the bright side. And you know this other half, but you just don't know that you know it. So let me bring out of you, very briefly. There are 2 people, one speaks German and one speaks German and 4 more languages. And then both learn a new language. Who do you think will do better? Well, it's going to be the one who speaks 1 and 4 more languages, and not the one who only speaks 1 language. Take a musical instrument. This guy has never learned one. This guy knows to play 4. So they both learn a new one. Who will do better? Again, this guy. Take a new tool. This guy is not a tool person. This guy has a little workshop in the basement. They both buy a new tool. Who is going to be better at using the tool? Again, this guy. It gets boring. No matter what we're talking about. Our brain have an interesting quality, if you think about it. The hard drive in this computer, when it's 50% full, it has 50% capacity left. And if it's 95% full, it has 5% capacity left. How about this thing? Well, have you ever met somebody who said, you know, I know 5 languages by now, my language centers are full? No, because you would laugh at such a person, because you intuitively know that's not the case. In fact, there are people who know 30 languages. They can learn the 31st in a few weeks. So what is it about your brain? Well, your brain has the interesting feature, unlike a hard drive, the more is in there, the more still fits in, and it doesn't get full. That sounds paradoxical, but that's just how it is. So the more you have already learned, the easier it is to learn more on top of that, because you use your pre-existing knowledge to sort out and understand what's new, and the more knowledge is already in here, the better you can use that knowledge to acquire additional knowledge. That's a very important point, because many people these days say, oh, the digital natives, they use a lot of digital screens, and so they spend a lot of time with several things that they're not that good at because they haven't learned them. But because of that, they have saved space in their brains, so they are better able to learn other things. Notice, this is complete, utter nonsense. Everything you haven't learned in childhood and adolescence is impairing further learning in adulthood. And everything, everything you have learned in childhood and adolescence is not impairing learning in adulthood. It is not impairing, but it helps you to learn more. And what you have not learned in the first 20 years or so will hinder you in further learning. So lifelong learning, which is a mega term these days for many people talk about lifelong learning. Well, you basically have managed that when you're 20 and when you have gotten a good education. And if you haven't, that's that. You can do still a bit, but not that much. So this is why early education, this is why we put kids to school and not grown-ups. We have to do this because of this curve that you just see still. Because education has to take place early, because then it's most effective. Now, the upside is that the more you learn at your young age, the better your brain works. Just having a language center doesn't enable you to speak. The language center has to be trained up by millions of words that you have digested early on in your life that have been spoken to you, responded, etc., literally millions of words. And once you have done this, then your brain centers that speak get up to speed and they can speak. And the more words you have heard early on, the better your language capabilities are going to be. And if you learn 2 languages early on, even better, because then your language centers get extra training. So what you see here as the yellow curve is basically the developmental trajectory or the educational trajectory of your brain. It doesn't know much at the start, at birth, and then it learns very quickly. So the curve is steepest at the beginning. Then you reach a plateau of very good functioning. And in the end, there is a little bit of decline, and we'll go into this later. But notice, this is happening only when you are in the right place, in the right environment, when there is an educational setting, so when everything works. And also notice there's hand use, sensory motor, there's music, sports, theater, and there's no use of digital screen media, because if you just swipe across a featureless surface, well, very little is going on in your brain, and you don't use in a meaningful way your hand, which is what you do. You roll, grab the needle, grab the pencil, grab the key, the egg, hold on to something, or grab the bucket. The hand automatically does all this with ease, okay? But it has to learn it by doing all this stuff. Just by watching, you don't learn these hand uses. And notice that the motor areas get ever more complicated and then become thinking areas. So, and the motor areas, they basically teach the thinking areas, because our thinking doesn't have any direct connection to the outside world. It's connected via sensory things, and it's connected via motor things to the outside world, areas to the outside world, which is why we have to use our motor skills, and thinking comes on top of this, planning, imaging things. And so we need to train up our sensory motor parts of the brain in order to get better thinkers, planners, inventors, etc. This is all in the literature. For example, if kids watch videos, they use their visual centers and their language centers. But if you read to a kid, it will imagine the plot and the imaging, imagine the fairy and imagine the little girl and the old man, etc. And so the language centers will drive the imagination, which is done back here, and it's driven by here. So you foster the connections between here and here. Think about the brain takes on new connections by its use. If you just use this and you use this independently by processing the sound stream and the video stream, you don't get them to connect a lot. So you hurt development of mental imagery and creativity, because that's what you need to use, imagery, in order to come up with creative new connections of ideas and images. So this is a very important point. That's why this is not a good idea. By now, the most used gadget on the globe is this thing. And what it does is it basically wreaks havoc, as you can see here, to brain development. And in addition, it causes addiction. I'll go into that later. But my point is that early on, it's not a good idea to use digital screen media for young kids, education, and there are data, I'm going to this soon, showing that even for older kids, it's not good. For juveniles, adolescents, it's not good. Even for young adults, it's not good and interferes with brain functioning. So this is not a good idea. This baby toilet with an iPad holder is not a good idea, because at that age, when they do toilet training, their brains need real interaction and not just tapping onto some. The most important school subjects are sports, doing things with your hands, music, and theater. And that's not romantic pedagogy. That came out in Science magazine almost 10 years ago, when the theme was how early education should work. No screens. Take the World Health Organization. What does it say? The less screen time for kids, the better. Less is better, period. Whatever you do, less is better. So let me give you just a few data. This is a study in almost 2,500 mothers and children, and the children were 2 years, and then they were followed up for another year, and then followed up for another 2 years. So they had data on screen use and the development, cognitive development, at 2 years, 3 years, and 5 years. And this is what comes out. Screen time at 24 months, at 2 years, negatively affects the ASQ3. That's sort of like an IQ test for kids. So affects cognitive performance negatively. And the performance at 24 months, that's the ASQ3 on the left side, doesn't influence the screens at 36 months. That is, it is not that those with a lower score watch more TV a year later, but it is that those who watch more TV a year earlier, or watch more screens a year earlier, do worse cognitively 1 year later. The same thing is true when you look at screen time at age 3 and cognitive performance at age 5. Again, you get a negative correlation between screen time at 3 and cognitive performance at 5. And it's not the other way around again. So from this time series, you can have you can do an educated guess as regards causality. This is another study, this time in 4,500 8 to 11-year-olds. And they looked at screen time, and they also looked at cognitive development. So the findings clearly highlight the importance of limiting recreational screen time and for cognitive development. That was the outcome measure. So here we have data from 8 to 11-year-olds, clearly saying the more screen time, the worse the cognitive development. Well, digital IT in education decreases attention, decreases learning, decreases the the attainment of knowledge, and even causes more dementia. And let me show you some data to clearly illustrate that. So about cell phones and attention. Well, if the cell phone rings, you get a decrease in attention and memory. Attention is left, memory is right. So if it rings, attention and memory basically go down by about 50%. Well, this has been published 10 years ago, and everybody can empathize with this. Well, if you're bothered by this thing, your mental capability goes down. Well, this is a study, it came out 3 years ago, that tried to figure out what happens if the smartphone sits here on my desk and doesn't ring. It just sits here. They compared smartphone sitting next to your keyboard or your computer screen with having a smartphone sitting in your desk, in your bag at the bottom of your desk or in the other room. And then they had the people at the computer screen doing either cognitive tests or an IQ test. So it's either thinking or your IQ that was measured with your smartphone on next to you or in the other room, and in between was in the bag down there. And these are the results. The left three columns are working memory capacity. That's another word for thinking capacity. So if its smartphone is in the other room, you're better at thinking. The right columns is intelligence. So when you are having your smartphone on your desk, your IQ is down, measurably so. And the difference is about one school type. So you will go to a good high school, and you did a high school degree. So you have a full, in Germany we call it Abitur, and you put your smartphone on your desk, your IQ goes down to something like a kid from middle school, which is a serious effect. There are numerous studies about attentional deficits caused by screen media. Here's just a big one from China, 7,102 Chinese adolescents, and it turns out that the more smartphone use they have, the more likely they are to suffer from attention deficit disorder. So if you have decreased attention, you learn less. And it turns out that this is exactly what happens if you put computers in schools. This is a study where they did this. And then they figured out what happens when you when you do a new class and you have computerized teaching. It turns out that, and they measured this because they followed every kid in the classroom and measured time on the computer and measured what did they do on the computer. So 34% of the time in the classroom was used for non-academic use. That is, they shopped, they used Facebook, they read email, they chatted, they read news and sports, watched videos, and played games. And everything they did, not paying attention to the school subject, was negatively correlated, as you can see here, with the final exam that they also did. So yes, there are risks and side effects if you use a computer in educational settings, and here they are. Now you can ask, are there effects? What they also did, they measured the screen time that the kids in this class spent on their subject. And then they also had the final exam. And there was zero correlation between the time on the subject, on the computer, and the final exam. That is, digital media have measurable side effects when it comes to education, and they have no effects. The PISA study found the same thing. Here you have 15-year-olds, and in fact, these are data from tens of thousands of kids. In Germany alone, tens of thousands of kids take the PISA test every couple of years. And these are data from more than 50 countries, where they have used PISA data to assess how well do the students in the country do over 10 years. And they also checked how much was invested per capita, that is per school kid, in the different countries in computers and digital infrastructure in the school. So you have a graph that shows you on the x-axis, on the left fewer computers, on the right more computers, and on the y-axis there's a zero. That is when nothing changed in the 15-year-olds from a given country. If they got better, they get up. if they get worse comparatively from the start, they get down. So if more computers would give you more education, you would expect a connection like this. Well, the connection that's been found is this. So the negative correlation is about 0.5. That is, the more a country invested in digital education, the less the kids did in the schooling. So the worse they got. So here's a clear negative. Take Finland. They were always very good at the PISA results, and they gotten really not quite well, simply because they invested heavily. Australia in 2008 spent 2.6 billion Australian dollars, and they got really bad because of this, and in 2016 removed all the computers and digital infrastructure from their schools. Computers in schools harm education, and this is one of the largest studies that exist, and the correlation is really clear. Well, decreased knowledge. This is a well-done study from the US Military Academy in West Point. And they wanted to digitize their schools, but first what they did was they said, let's try it out. So they had this with about 15 youngsters each, and they randomized them into 3 groups. So one group got a laptop and a tablet, another group got only a laptop, and another group of classes got nothing. The computers were prohibited. And then they did a whole semester, and then they did tests, and they found that those who had either a laptop and a tablet or only a tablet were performing about 20% worse than those where the computer was prohibited. So 20% of a standard deviation less, that's a substantial effect. So they figured out we don't want computers in education. And also they say, hey, this is not your run-of-the-mill school. This is a military academy. People are highly motivated. They want to make a career. They pay money for getting there. So they are those who really want to learn. And even in those, digital education hurts. And the authors conclude this effect is going to be bigger in any other educational setting, where there are not that motivated people and not that bright kids who really want to get a good education. So there are, by now, is a flood of papers like this one. Students are better off without laptop in the classroom. Again, let me make this clear. Yes, computers are in the workplace all over. And yes, we should know how to switch them on. And basically, the rest is self-explanatory. I learned to use a computer when I was 35 or so. I was an early adopter, I must say. But I still learned it the hard way. And some people today, or many people today, they easily do this, but that doesn't give you programming skills. And for those, you need to be good at language and good at math. And this has to come first, and then you program. And the other way around simply doesn't work. Just to give you another study from Great Britain, again, economists did it. They found 90 schools that between 2002 and 2012 introduced a smartphone ban on mobile phones. Then they got the grades of all the 130,000 school kids in the 90 schools, and they put them together such that day 0 was when the smartphone ban started, no matter when that was. And then you have a year later, and you have the mean of the grades. And they also did, for comparison and control, the grades before the smartphone ban. And this is what comes out. Before the ban, the 0 point, average grade is randomly distributed about 0. So nothing much changes. And the error bars overlap with a red line. That is no significant change. But just to the ban, you have a non-overlapping error bar, and so you have an increase of the grades. Another year and another year, see the grades go up. So banning smartphones at school is actually good for school performance. In an older study, they gave out iPhones, and they found that those who got the iPhones, who didn't have iPhones before, got worse in school. So if you give out smartphones, kids get worse in school. If you ban smartphones, they are getting better. And again, this is a study in 130,000 plus school children. The most important finding here is if you distribute, if you make quintiles, that is, if you group the kids according to their grade. So on the left column is the 20% of the worst performing kids, then the better 20, the middle 20, the good, and the very good 20%. And here's the change introduced by the smartphone ban. So the less well the kids are doing, the better the smartphone ban for them, which is in accord with many studies that everyone that who looked at that basically found that this or other digital information technology hurts those who are not doing so well most. And the clever people you almost can't hurt much with the digitization of schools. They're not benefiting, but they are not hurt. But if you talk about equal chances in education for the richer or the poorer people, notice that digitization hurts the poorest most. Electronic textbooks, you learn less when you use them instead of regular books. That has been found over and over. A meta-analysis came out recently, showed that reading from paper is better for memorization, what you read, compared to reading from screens. If you ask Silicon Valley 17-year-olds, what do you want for reading, paper or screens? They say 85%, they say paper. They have done the same thing in Finland, same result. So youngsters know what's good for them, and this is books, not screens. The important point here is this: brains don't do downloads. Computers do, but brains are used and thereby change, as I set out in my little brain introduction. And we call this learning. So the more you use your brain, the more you learn. If it's a tough task, good, then you really think hard about the problem. The better things get stuck in here. If everything's easy, and if the computer takes away a mental effort, which it does, which is why all grown-ups use it, because it does take away mental effort. So it's good for getting the job done, but it's not good for putting mental effort back here, which is needed in order to change the brain. This is an important thing from brain research of the last half century, as I've said before. Just to illustrate my point, these are data from 1.8 million massive open online courses, and they looked at every dot on this graph is actually a country, and they aggregated the data such that you have people aggregated by country, and then they group the countries by their development index. That's basically how educated people from that country are, and then you get the completion rate. So how many were successfully doing this massive open online course? Notice first, the completion rate is abysmally low. It's about 4 to 8%. Think about a new operation method in surgery, and 4 to 8% of the patients make it. You wouldn't really say, oh, we have a great new operation tool. You wouldn't. And in education, they say we have a great new tool for education. Well, the success rate is 4 to 8%. And notice, the more you have already in here, the better your learning is. That is, the more educated you are, the more likely you are going to make digital education. But you know, a 35-year-old with a good education may do a massive open online course and benefit from it. But children, adolescents, with little pre-existing knowledge, no way. When you write, takes more effort than when you type, which is why writing is better for memory than keying. And a lot of studies have shown this by now, that well, the more you do when you learn, the better. Computer versus brain, we already noticed this. Computers can do downloads and they get full. Brains don't. They get better and better because of their use. And that's the most important take-home message. Hard drives get full, brains don't. And the fuller brains are, the more they can learn on top of that. They're getting better and better. And now let me come 2 sentences about digital dementia. It's very simple. Dementia literally means mental decline. or mental descent. And for every descent, there's a very simple truism. The higher you start, the longer it takes you to get down. So the better educated your brain is when you are 20, the longer it takes you to get dementia when there is some pathology in your brain, because your brain is more trained up. So when it goes down, it starts higher up. This is not a personal books about dementia. The most important protective factor when it comes to getting dementia or not is not eating blueberries or broccoli or jogging. No, it's your educational attainment in childhood and adolescence. The higher you got, the longer it takes you to get down at old age. It's as simple as that. And that's what I call digital dementia. And we're all going to have to pay for that in a couple of decades from now. There's no question about it, because it's all out there and we know these simple correlations between brain development, that is education, and the onset of dementia. So let me switch gears for the last 5 minutes. Here's the health problems: bad body posture, overweight, diabetes, hypertension, short-sightedness, sleep disorders, stress, high-risk behavior, that is road accidents and sexually transmitted diseases. That all goes with digital media use. There's short-sightedness is a big problem. Normally it is 1 to 5% of the population who suffers from short-sightedness. When you look at the under 20-year-olds in Europe, it's now 30%, and we're going towards 50%. In China, it's 80%, and in South Korea, it's 95%. The average South Korean spends 5.4 hours on average in front of the smartphone. Notice the smartphone is not only the most used device on earth, it's also the smallest, which is why you have it closest to your eyes. And when you look at close range, while your eyes are still developing, they adapt at this range and they get short-sighted. So short-sightedness is an eye development problem. And once you have it, you have it. And short-sightedness comes in the long run with 4 major eye disorders that all give you, in the long run, increased risk of blindness. So here we have a big problem. We have a myopic epidemic or pandemic, because it's a global problem, and we'll have more blind people in a couple of decades from now. What to do about it? Well, the dosage makes the poison, and we have to protect children and adolescents, because whenever the eyes are developed, then nothing much will happen. So adults over about 25, they can watch smartphones as long as they want, but kids must not, because it will hurt their eyesight. Sleep disorders, about the same thing. Almost everybody watches screens during the night. The light makes sure that you get sleep disorders and you get less sleep. That has been found in the sleep lab. There are large-scale studies. The one I've just shown you was a Norwegian study in about 10,000 kids, and they all use their screens before going to sleep, which is impairing their sleep, gives you stress, gets your educational attainment down, and will in the end basically take away a few years of your life, which is again not good. What to do? Well, there's no looking the right way. No matter whenever you look at your smartphone, when there's dark, you get the light, and the light will interfere with your sleep. And notice there is a lot of things, and these are the final idea here is these are all frequent disorders. And if you increase the frequency of something that is already very frequent, we are talking about millions of people or millions of dead people, so to speak, because digital media interfere with serious health issues. Just as well, mental health, addiction, aggression, anxiety, depression, decreased empathy, and decreased life satisfaction all come with increased digital media use. Just to give you an idea, cell phone use causes more anxiety and less academic achievement, and therefore less satisfaction with life. Facebook predicts subjective well-being. That is, the more Facebook use you have, the less satisfied you are with your life and the more depressed you are. A large study in the UK found that girls that spend more than 3 hours in Facebook per day are twice as likely to suffer from depression when they are 18. and a large scale, even larger scale US study in more than 500,000 young people from 13 to 18 shows that the more Facebook screen time you have, the more suicidal you are. So a clear relation, and this is just two ways of analyzing the data, bivariate or multivariate, and you find the same thing. The more screen time, the more suicidal risk. Addiction, well, we know addiction and the brain. This came out in September 1997. And they put cocaine addicts in the scanner and gave them cocaine and looked where the brain lights up. And what you see here is the ventral striatum, which is about reward. It's about positive emotion, and it's also about addiction. But it's not the addiction center. We use it for learning, for motivation, for curiosity. But you can also do drugs, and then nothing else will interest you, which is why it's such a bad thing to do drugs. And so addiction is something that we have identified in the brain. We basically know the mechanism, which is why the following study is so interesting. They put people in the scanner, and before they found out how much their degree of Facebook addiction is, and then within the scanner, they showed them the F of Facebook or other paraphernalia of Facebook. And here's what you get. So you get light up that light up the more Facebook addict you are, because you get this correlation that you see on the right side. So left is Facebook, right is cocaine. I know I'm very short and I made a very long story very short, but for those who say, well, there is no such thing as digital addictions. Well, here's Facebook addiction. Looks remarkably like cocaine addiction from a brain point of view. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, for good reasons, has identified smartphone use, computer use, Facebook use, gaming as a form of addiction. It's a behavioral addiction, can be treated like any other addictions, has to be treated because it doesn't go away alone. Risks and side effects not only affect education and health, but also society. There's decreased empathy, trust, and solidarity, decreased level of general education, as I said, decreased time spent in nature, which is not good for your health and actually your attention and other capabilities, increased loneliness and anonymity, it has been shown. And on top of that, there's decreased truth, increased radicalization, decreased privacy, and endangered democracy. So just to give you a few data, on Twitter, falsity spreads much faster than the truth. One commentator commented on this Science magazine study, the truth is still doing the shoelaces when falsity is around half the globe already. So it's kind of a turbocharged rumor engine. And as long as curious people use Twitter, this is going to happen. So it's not a feature of Twitter, it's an interaction between human curiosity. If I tell you something that's trivial, 2 times 2 is 4, you won't retweet it. If I tell you the Pope's pregnant, you'll retweet it. Why? Oh, that's interesting. It also happens to be false. But the more false something is, the more interesting it is, because it's unlikely, therefore it is false, but also therefore it's interesting, which is why falsity gets retweeted faster, which is why Twitter can't help but being a turbocharger for a turbocharged rumor engine. YouTube is watched by billions of people, 1 billion hours per day. And thanks to the Corona crisis, use has increased by about 30%. 70% of what's watched in YouTube is recommended by the YouTube recommendation algorithm. That is recommended by YouTube. And to keep you watching, the next video is always slightly more radical than the one before. So you start with a vegetarian food and a video, and after a few videos, you are watching vegan food videos. You start with Bill Clinton, end up with Karl Marx. You start with the jogging, and so you get radicalized. Well, this were not a problem if it affected a few people. It affects billions of people for 1 billion hours a day. So think about neuroplasticity, and the world's population is shown hours per day ever more increased radical stuff, by definition more radical than the people are, well, that increases radical behavior. This is what you see in the news on a daily basis, and it's not a good development. Computers spy out your personality. The Cambridge Analytica scandal brought this about, and then you can be used as a customer. Advertisement is 50% more effective if you personalize it. That all came out in studies. They even did a study showing that can we influence elections with digital media, with Facebook, for example? And they published this in 2012. And here is a 61 million people experiment whether you can influence elections in the United States. And the answer is, yes, you can. So it's all published. It's all out there. Digital information technology is going to endanger democracy. It is not just bad for your body, bad for your mind, it's also bad for our society. So I think, to sum up, digital information technology comes with serious side effects regarding mind, body, and society. There has never been a serious assessment of risks and side effects, and we are constantly brainwashed how great this all is. Again, I am not against digital information technology, but there are serious side effects, and the damage is most serious during brain development, that is in children and adolescents. Therefore, we must not sacrifice the health and education of our children, our most precious resource, that is our future, to the profit interests of the rich companies on earth. Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. They have a lot of money. They made it on us, our time, our attention, our life. They monetize our lives. If we do, and if we let they do this to our kids, we act irresponsibly. Digital IT is a great tool, but it should be used to our benefit, not to the benefit of a few billionaires. Take note, tell others. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spitzer, for sharing your valuable insights and learnings with us. Now we would like to ask you a few questions.
Yes, sure. I did 51 minutes, so I was overdoing time 1 minute, sorry.
Do you think hobbies like music, art, and drama can help us in maintaining a sound mental balance, and how?
Well, as I showed, yes. Music, drama, sports, doing things with your hand, arts, that can counterbalance, right? My point is, if you are young, you shouldn't counterbalance bad effects. You shouldn't have the bad effects in the first place. As I'm all with the WHO, in kids, the less is better, okay? And of course, more, you have to do something with your time, something meaningful. And the stuff you mentioned, that's all very meaningful. It's also very much fun. So yeah, do the fun things. Learn how to play the violin. Once you learn that, you have fun for the entire life playing with others, and nobody can take this away from you. And there are many things you can learn at young age this way, that once you learn it, you have it for your entire life. And we should make sure we give this to our children, all our children.
So my question for you is, given that we now rely heavily on digital and technological advancement, what do you recommend as a balance between progress and digital dementia?
Well, I've been asked, so I work with a computer all day. Can I retire early because of digital dementia and get some benefits because I risk my life whenever I get to work? And the answer, of course, no, you're not. What I'm talking about is your free time that you are spending on screens, kind of flipping around or shooting enemies or chatting with your friends for 5 hours a day. That doesn't make you educated or happy or satisfied with your life. And given the enormous amount of data we have on this, it's really amazing to me that you still get bombarded with digital is great, digital is wonderful, we have to get more digital. No. And again, once you're 18, at least in Germany, you are responsible for your own life, and you should be a bit educated to make responsible and wise decisions. But whenever it comes to people who are not yet adults, other adults must take responsible decisions for them. And so it's upon us, adults, to say to a 14-year-old, no, I don't buy you a smartphone because it's not good for you. I have an 11-year-old daughter. She's the only in class without a smartphone. She's not the outsider. She doesn't get mobbed because you get mobbed via smartphone. She doesn't have one. And in fact, she's the only one talking with everybody else. So she's in the center of the class and she's friends with everybody or with most of them. And so she doesn't suffer a thing. I'm often told by parents, I cannot do this because my kid will be the outlier and it will be the outcast. No. You talk with others. The others will do this, which is not communication. So it's, and again, this is all addictive. So take note. So if all in the class of your kid do cocaine, you want your kid to be the outlier, not taking cocaine because everyone else does it. And we have to treat the issue of smartphones and digital media just the same because it is addictive and it impairs brain development just as drugs do. I know this view is pretty strange to many people, but the more you think about it, and if you read the science papers on it, it'll be clear there is no other view. Everything else is hype. Oh, we have to do this and they have to get introduced to this. No, they don't have to. Let me give you another example. Take lead. We learned the hardware that lead paint is not good for children's IQ. So this nice white wall will be touched by kids and then they will lick their fingers so their lead will go up. And if it does in the brain, it is dampening down education and IQ, measurably so. So we got rid of lead paint about 100 years ago. We got rid of lead piping of water pipes. And not everywhere in the US, and you had big scandals when it came to lead poisoning of thousands of kids in the Whitewater scandal, for example. Then we had lead in gasoline. We got rid of it because we found out that heavy traffic streets, those kids who live there have a lower IQ because of the increased lead in their system. So nobody said, oh, can I have half a lead pointed wall because they are so shiny white? No, if you realize lead is not good for your kid, you want to get rid of lead, period. And you don't ask, can I have a bit of lead? No, you don't want. And in fact, there is no threshold. They have introduced the threshold, so lead below that is maybe okay, but they recently found that even in everybody below threshold, there's a clear correlation between lead in the blood and IQ. And it's still the more, the less. So there is no threshold. Any lead is hurting your kid. Any screen time is going to hurt your kid. And again, it's not me, it's the WHO saying this.
What is the one piece of advice you would give to someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and active in terms of their brain and emotional activity?
Well, once you know all this, I think you can act responsibly. I would, as a parent, I have 6 kids, and I've been very strict when it came to media use. We had one computer in not the nicest area of the living room. It was a bit windy, and of course, with 5 kids, they can only use, well, every single one of them. No games, no video games. That's complete waste of time, and you don't want that. So they could stay in touch by email with their friends. It's wonderful, but no smartphones. They haven't been around back then, and with my 11-year-old, no smartphones. So when it comes to what I have responsibility for younger kids, I think you have to be very strict. You have to protect youngsters from these risks and side effects. Once you are responsible for yourself, that is, once you are an adult, you have to think carefully what's good for you and what isn't good for you. Watching this all the time is definitely not good for you, and most adults by now have figured this out for themselves.
So in your research, you've extensively covered the negative impacts of technology on education and the growth of young minds. Given the coronavirus pandemic and consequent online education, what are your recommendations for the student body?
Well, we have witnessed the corona pandemic. I've written a book on the corona pandemic. And what happens is really disastrous because we had closed schools, and it was very clear that screens can't replace the classroom and the teacher. And people say, now we have to do digital because we have no other option. Well, and so we just must do this. It turns out, well, everybody had to do it, and everybody learned how bad it is. A computer is not a replacement for a teacher. You can do some training things, and there are some good uses for computers, yes, but they have to be balanced again against the known risks and side effects, which is why just to buy computers in schools and then say learning will get better, this is for the last 2 decades, it has been tried and it didn't work. So we know it doesn't work, and I think German politicians have figured this out. So in Germany, we do everything to avoid closing kindergartens and schools because we know these young people will going to have to pay for the pandemic, all the extra money we take alone, they have to pay this back, and we cannot hurt their education and their productivity, and we do hurt them when we close schools. School closures have a clear effect on productivity, and it's billions, literally billions of euros and dollars that come with school closures over the decades thereafter because of lost education and lost productivity. And if you add it all up, it's really bad. So we stay away from alcohol, and we do a lot of stuff that people don't like, but we do it. And I think it's right the way we do it, just to make sure that we can have our schools and kindergartens open.
Dr. Spitzer,
Yes.
Thank you for that brilliant and enlightening address. I'm sure that all gathered here have gained a lot from your talk. Sir, I'm so intrigued by the brain's elasticity and the ability to expand. The fact that the more we feed it, the more it grows. The more you learn, the easier it gets to further learn. The fact that we can ensure our brain's functionality and protect it by continuing to learn is so empowering and reassuring. I think we're all also brought to investigate how our time, our attention, and our response patterns are deeply impacted by the social media platforms that we continue to use. I think these are all very important questions that we're all going to have to ask ourselves. We really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us all, especially the students. This conversation has been an enriching one with many ideas that the students can take back home and ponder upon. Thank you for this truly insightful, deeply interesting and engaging session. We are very grateful for it. We look forward to this association with you to further grow and thrive. Wishing you and your loved ones health and safety. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was my pleasure to do this talk. And if you can let me know eventually how it works and how it is received, I'd be very happy to learn more. And if there's anything I can do, I'm more than happy to help out. Thank you.